Oh, and Michael's away. He had let us know he wasn't gonna make it tonight. So welcome everyone. It is being recorded. For those of you in the room, if there's an emergency, you can go out the back of the back of the room, and there's exits at either end of the hallway. Do we have any agenda changes suggested?
I'd like to add a brief conversation about the letter that Megan Emery sent to all of us, if that's appropriate.
That is a good question. So about the comp plan and transportation connections, kind of that.
No, it was about Megan's article that she put in the other paper, which was upset about the change that we made in the comp plan, removing human focused from the language, and about how that happened, maybe why it happened, how we might do it differently in the future. And just a little bit more like that.
Is that an okay to think? Are we allowed to add that to the agenda?
I think as long as there's no action item and it's not a, if it gets to be a big substantive discussion, would recommend that you add it to an agenda separately. But if you're going to have a shorter conversation, that's why there's the ability to do this.
Okay.
So as
Yeah,
long as there's no action.
And I think with if the focus of the conversation is on sort of how to avoid this kind of happening in the future, that's perfectly fine by me. I would just note that the city plan has been submitted to city council, so it's not something that is bringing that document back.
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds okay with others?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put that under other business. And let's see, so open to the public for items not related to the agenda. If you're joining us online, you can unmute and turn your video on if you have something to say. Anything? Okay, not hearing anything. So we can move on to announcements. So I guess one of my announcements is we did pass on the comprehensive plan to the city council. Paul and I went and kind of gave it to them, essentially. They didn't have a lot of substantive discussion on the 3rd. Was it the 3rd?
16th.
16th. Oh yeah, the 16th right here. These are my notes. We gave a general overview and they set some targets. They're going to have their public hearing on November 16th. And it sounded like potentially a internal council discussion maybe before that, but they weren't set on that. I don't know if that got
So they've scheduled a council work session on the 30th, next Monday,
okay.
as a special meeting, and then they won't make any actions at that meeting, similar to how you had some discussions leading up to your public hearing. They'll be having some discussions as a work session for them on the 30th, and then the first public hearing is November 16th. They're
Okay.
required to have at least 2.
That sounds.
They've only warned the 1 so far.
So they picked bad days for me. I have work commitments both of those evenings. So I don't know that one of us needs to be there necessarily, but
I would suggest for the 30th that it's a council work session, so I don't think there's any expectation that commissioners are in attendance. Coming out of that meeting, they may say it would be great to have a representative at our public hearing. But I don't, at least for this coming Monday, I don't think there's any need.
So it sounds like maybe Thursday, the 6th, November 16, might be good to have someone there, but I guess we'll see. They said lots of very wonderful things in general, that they were impressed and it was great work and they really appreciated it. They thought the maps were really nice. And for the most part, they kind of held their comments. They, Megan had a few she wanted to get out there, but I think they were mainly saving their discussion for their work session. So yeah, it's a nice job. Other announcements? Paul?
Taylor Burns has resigned from the city council. And they, Megan Emery and Andrew Chalmers are interviewing people tomorrow and Thursday. And they have 10 candidates to choose from to appoint for what will be a 4-month term, because the charter requires that the city choose city councilors. And so that election will be in March at the usual town meeting election. And on the 30th, which is a special meeting, they're going to be an executive session, I think, at the beginning of the meeting, and we'll choose who they are going to replace Tyler with. And they will announce that, and I guess that person will become a counselor at that time, including attending the meeting on Monday as a counselor. So some new person will get our plan to discuss Monday night. Although I have applied to be appointed, so who knows, maybe I could be there, but my guess is I'll probably be back here. That would be my guess. So that's the news on the political side.
Very nice. So I guess either way, we'll work with you ongoing. We wouldn't be
Yes.
completely losing you. Other announcements from anyone? Any other staff items?
Just that the council also received and warned a public hearing on the zoning amendments that you passed at your last meeting for November 20th,
Yes.
which is the regular meeting following the city plan special meeting on the 16th.
Great. Okay, welcome, Donna. Did you have anything under announcements?
We're doing announcements.
Okay, we'll move on to item 5. So the first thing on the agenda is the form-based code east end of Market Street updates.
Okay, thanks, everybody. So this is a update and picking up the discussion that you had quite some time ago, actually almost 2 years ago, about possible adjustments to the form-based code at the east end of Market Street. So backing up a little bit before I get into the substance of it, when the form-based code was initially adopted, one of the nice things about the code is that it is the different subzones are relatively self-contained, and so it is intended to not be a heavy writing lift if in the future the city decides that an area has evolved and it's time to move it from, say, a portion from a T4 to a T5. That's not to say that you have to in any way, shape, or form, but the idea would be that that's part of developing a form-based code, is that you can change its T designation. So just quickly that background. So about in very late 2021, so almost 2 years ago, Alana Blanchard, our project director, came to the commission and talked a little bit about the TIF district, talked about redevelopment opportunities, and talked about the east end of Market Street, and specifically a couple of properties owned by the Chastanet family and another couple owned by the Unsworth family, about opportunities for redevelopment. That area is currently in the T3 plus district. What that means is the townhomes that were built on the east end of Market Street are in the T3 district. This T3 plus is similar, but with an additional story height allowed, so up to 3.5 stories. The feedback from the commission at the time was that you were interested in exploring moving some of that land from a current T3 plus designation to a T4 designation. The big difference being T3 plus is more the townhouse scale. T4 is typically allows for multifamily buildings where there's interior corridors, akin to what you've seen built in recent years in this area. The guidance that we were given at the time was to look at something that would keep the frontage along Market Street and Heinsberg Road itself as a T3, so that the scale is both creating a transition along Market Street into the heart of city center and also being respectful and reflective to a certain extent of what's pre-existing on the east side of Heinsberg Road, where there's a number of single family homes. That's also the T3 district. So and that beyond that, you were interested in exploring a T4 designation. We also talked a little bit about streets, and I'm going to show that to you in a minute. What we're hoping to get from you tonight, given that there's some new commissioners here, was a little bit of a refresh of the discussion. It's been a couple of years, so we don't want to make any assumptions. Get some general feedback as to where we are with the draft that we've got, and then use that to go and have some specific dialogue with the property owners in that area, so that we get their feedback as well about both technically, do they have any questions, but more importantly, you know, is this something that what would it lean to and result in from their end? So with that, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen, maybe. Okay, this is largely the same thing that you will have received in your packet, just it's a little more, I've got a few more tools here. So this is a map of city center. Just to orient you, we are right here. This is Market Street. Heinsberg Road on the right-hand side here. Garden Street as it's been built here. Dorset Street, the U Mall, etc. I can turn these off just quickly so that you can, nope, can I turn it off? Where are they hiding? There we go. So you can see this is not, the aerial photography is a little bit out of date, but here are the two buildings, Champlain Housing Trust and Dover Place. The area that we're talking about is this area over here. So currently the Village Green Apartments are here. These properties are owned by one entity. These three here, the Chastanet family, there's two single family house lots on it. There is likely a developable parcel in here that's owned by Snyder Braverman, which is the company that's been doing a lot of the development here in the core city center. There are also wetlands in this area. And so not all of that is necessarily fully developable. You'll see that there are a couple of curb cuts that have already been designed and built into Market Street. So one of them is over here that would, if this is a developable parcel, would allow access to that one. This one is the one that's a little more important for tonight's conversation. This is a curb cut that's been built, and the approximate distance here from there to the corner is about what a typical city center block is intended to be. So the same as between here and Garden Street, about 400 feet. So that spacing is intended to be about a developable block. And then up here, a couple of features to be aware of. This is Ruth Street right here. And so that is, if there was going to be a connection made back there for a future street, it would be nice to have a four-way intersection instead of having more and more offsets. This property, as I said, the Village Green Apartments, is owned by the Unsworth family. They own one of these two also. I think it's this one. They don't currently have any redevelopment plans. But they have in the past expressed interest in possible infill, and they are fairly seasoned property owners and developers. So even though they have not expressed that this is on their to-do list, we don't know what the future might be. And then lastly, I'm just going to flag up in this corner. This is Garden Street that's just been built here. The city owns this piece right here and this piece right here. And we have an agreement with the school district for this tiny little triangle here. It's a voter approved TIF district project to extend Garden Street up here, over to here, and then to fix this intersection up here, including the city has recently acquired the former travel agency so that this can all be straightened out. So just giving you a little bit of context at that end, there is a natural resource, the Potash Brook is right here between Garden Street and Price Chopper area and Village Green. So it's not necessarily a road connection there, but we could imagine a footpath being there in the future to connect folks between those areas. So just thinking about that as overall context. So I'm now going to bring on zoning districts. This is the current as it stands right now. Sorry for the interesting color choices. The orange here is the T5 district. The T5 is our highest district. That requires ground floor non-residential. So that's City Hall building. It's what you're seeing built immediately next to us. The blue here is the T4. As I said, T4 allows for 5-story buildings. It's agnostic to use. And so it could be commercial or residential on the ground floor. There's a spacing of doorways required on the first floor. However, upper story units can be accessed by interior corridors and things like that. The green here is the T3 plus, and the yellow is the T3. As I said, the difference between them is 1 story in height. So the T3 allows 2.5 stories, a half story being a pitched roof. And the green it allows for 3.5 stories. The main distinction here is that there is effectively a maximum building width in the T3 of 90 or 95 feet. So the way it is written is that lots cannot be more than 120 feet wide, and there has to be 10 or 15 feet of separation from on your side lot yard. And so that's why when we look right here, that's what you're seeing in the townhomes over here is that there's a lot line and there's a break between them. The mapping is not 100% accurate here, but
Units in each of those buildings?
in this case, there are 3 in each. So the other thing that is a feature of the T3 is each first story unit, and a unit is defined either in this case specific to the form-based code as either a dwelling unit or 1,500 square feet of commercial space. Either or. Each unit must have its own door on the street in the T3. So it's requiring that there be this pattern essentially of either very small scale commercial or more of a townhome style if you choose to do multifamily housing. There's an allowance that the commission added after the original form-based code was adopted to say that a single doorway could serve 2 second-story units. So you could have a doorway that goes up and serves 2 up there. So you could conceivably have additional units on an upper story there. There's a bunch more criteria that are different, but those are fundamentally the biggest difference between the T3 and the T4. Is a scale. And the idea of the T3 again is to be something that is closer in scale to historically small scale multifamily, single family neighborhoods. Again, agnostic to use with very few exceptions. So basically all uses are permitted. The way that use is regulated is by the form. And so a Home Depot will not want to locate in a circumstance where every 1,500 square feet needs to have a first floor door. And that's intentional. So it's regulating the use by form rather than saying, because, you know, conceivably a little mom and pop hardware store might want to use 1,500 square feet, and that might be totally appropriate. So that's the idea of addressing it that way. Yeah.
The T4 and the T5, I know we're not really talking about T5, but is the primary difference the requirement of commercial on the first floor, or is there a height difference as well?
There are other ones. So originally T4 allowed for 4 stories and T5 allowed for 6 stories. Now the T4 allows for 5 stories, and the T4 allows for 5 stories and the T5 allows for 6. So it's a little bit closer than it was. The main difference is the requirement for ground floor non-residential. There are some other differences. The doorway pattern is narrower in the T5. You have to have them more frequently than in the T4. There's some other ones, but fundamentally to the casual user, that's the big difference between the two. So now after all that talking about the background, I'll actually show you what the concept that we wanted to get your feedback on. So I just popped it on the screen here. In here, the blue outline is a proposed area that would be redesignated from T3 to T4, or become the new T4. The distance here is 90 feet away from Market Street and 90 feet from Heinsberg Road. That 90 feet is intentional in that is the depth of these lots here. So it's the depth of a set of townhomes and their parking area. There's also through application to the Development Review Board, an applicant has the ability to request that the zoning line between 2 districts move by up to 50 feet. So it could move to 140 feet, or it could move down to 40 feet. The idea there being, and this is part of we wanted some feedback from you, is this gives enough flexibility that if somebody wanted to propose a first tier of townhomes and then separately plan for something interior, they could do that. Or conceivably, they could propose a new housing type that we haven't really seen much of in this area, which is a front-facing townhome scale with a larger building attached to it and in behind it, by bringing it down to that 40 feet. So the first 40 feet becomes the townhome, and then behind it, it steps up. So the idea would be that we don't know exactly what the development scheme would be, but putting this number at 90 feet gives that ability under warranted circumstances to consider a couple of different options. Last 2 things that I'll say, and then I'll stop talking. I have this little green area shown in here. This is a possible recommendation to change this one parcel if it's developable. This belongs to Snyder Braverman, who've done the development over here. You can see that the parcel is split right now for some reason that doesn't appear to have any connection other than that's just where a line was drawn between T3 and T4. Their conceptual schemes have shown it as that go back all the way to when they got their Army Corps wetland permit, show a smaller scale building than what they've done here. It seems to staff that this would be a good place to have something that is more reflective of the scale of what's immediately around it, and then to have the break of all the wetlands and stormwater before getting into the larger scale, that it would be sort of an odd thing to have one building on Market Street that was very different scale from what's around it. And then the last thing I was going to say is this black dotted line represents a potential amendment to the official map. There's two ways that, well, let me back up. For a property to be developed in the form-based code, a building has to face either onto a public green or onto a street. So to unlock the development potential of this site, the property owners will need to build a roadway, and that was known from the very beginning. The catch is that under the form-based code, it says that development must occur on a connected street. So therefore, let's say this property owner wants to do something and they want to build a building, say right here. If they want to build that building and face it onto a street, they have to build a road that connects all the way back to a different, a roadway in a different place. So they'd have to build the entire section, either bringing it here, which is a maybe non-ideal location because it's offset from Ruth Street, or somehow convincing the property owner to the north to let them do it. So it's a little bit of an obstacle in that it may be difficult for them to complete the entire roadway. The alternative is that under the form-based code, when a roadway is on the city's official map, which is our planned roads, their responsibility is to build the section on their property, and they are not then responsible for connecting it. So we're seeing that exact thing happen at the former Holiday Inn. They're building the first section of the road and angling it over towards the Windjammer, and which is exactly what's on our official map, and their responsibility ends at the Windjammer property. So they don't have to build the whole thing because it's the city plan eventually to connect those. So by us adding this to the official map, by you adding it to the official map, opens up the development potential of this site without tying it legally to them having to basically convince their adjacent property owner that may not want to do anything to do something. All right, that's my spiel. I'd love to get your feedback. As I said, this isn't for final decision at all tonight. We haven't actually drafted up any text difference yet. We wanted to shop this around after hearing your feedback. So that's what I got.
Donna and then Laurie.
Yeah, just a question. What's driving the desire to increase the density on that inner lot?
I think it's a couple of things. One, there has been from the private sector side, a few different entities have approached the current property owners and expressed interest, and their interest has been in something more substantial in scale. So that's some of what we're hearing from that side. From the city's end, there's two components to it. One is, where are the opportunities for density in housing? And then two, this is in our tax increment finance district, where the city has objectives to help make sure that the expenditures that have been approved by the voters are met by the incremental tax. So higher value brings that revenue to make sure that things like the bike ped bridge and the various other improvements are financed. So that's an interest in that end. And then I think, more broadly speaking, it's a question for you all about what is the character of the downtown that you're looking to create. So don't feel that this is, while there are interests, you should feel that this is your process. This is not us telling you, you must do this. But that's your background.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I think that was the last meeting, we all kind of expressed the opinion that there's too many large buildings, and it's negatively affected the nature, the scale and the nature of the city center, because you can have density without having massive block buildings. And I think this site is probably the perfect place to show what a, 3-story townhouse courtyard type development, high density can be without being large blocks of large block interior courtyard building or interior corridor buildings. I mean, that was our whole discussion almost. What was that, the last meeting? Yeah, it was the last meeting, our whole
All the more
discussion
reason for
was-
us to check in with you after 2 years so that you're having a good dialogue about it.
Lori?
So I have a couple of questions. The first one is regarding the road on the official map. If a property owner decides to do a development and the requirement is that this road be continuous, but the city's not ready to do it, they can go ahead and do that development without that being a continuous road. Is that correct?
With or without the official map?
With the official map.
With the official map. So let's say the official map was put in regardless of what zoning district it is.
Yep.
And this property owner, which is a single entity, came in and they said, okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna build some dwelling units here facing Market Street and Heinsberg Road, and then we're gonna build some dwelling units right here facing onto this black line. They would be responsible for building this roadway segment from Market Street up to the line here, and for providing temporarily at least some safe turnaround. That would be the end of their responsibility. And then the assumption is that over time, whether it's a year later or 20 years later, when something does occur here or a variety of other mechanisms, that the roadway would be completed.
So they're able to do that development without the roadway being completed.
As long as they do their segment of it. That's the benefit of the official map.
And if it's not on the official map, the whole road needs to be in place.
Correct. They need to connect it. So what that would mean is that in all likelihood, what they would propose is to build it here and then potentially down there, which financially is a lot more roadway for them, that may or may not be in the city's interest about where we actually want to see a roadway built. And that's where the official map becomes a good dialogue about what do we want, because ultimately we will likely own this road, whether it's 5 years from now or 40 years from now.
I like that it controls where the road goes, which is beneficial. Being able to do the development without that road being there, if there's a reason for that road to be there, seems a little questionable to me, but I hear that's the way it's written. So the other question I had was, you talked about houses either need to face a roadway or a park. And I look at that piece of property and I think about our access to neighborhood parks and the whole conversation we've had about people having parks near them. And if that road weren't there, it would have to be a neighborhood park to build in the back area. Is there a way that we can do this so that when this is developed, there is a neighborhood park that creates the opportunity for what we talked about having a park with a cafe or whatever, creating neighborhood and community rather than just blocks of housing?
So there's a couple of different ways that could be explored, and we'd be happy to sort of come back with some ideas for you. One is in the city center form-based code, as with everywhere else in the city, there is now a minimum open space requirement. So they could, of their choice, group it together so that it becomes one larger one as opposed to a dispersed one. In terms of beyond that, I guess I'd have to think about that a little bit. There are tools that can do any of these. I think we'd want to be mindful of, what is the intent here versus other similar places, and is there something that is a specific need here that we'd want to apply, that you'd want to be applying this geography versus something that you're saying we want this to be a feature in other places similar to it, and then, you know, to what extent does existing park space in this, if it's the former, to what extent does existing park space in the area and connectivity to it, is that relevant or not relevant to you?
Am I remembering that our city plan goal is to have a park within a quarter mile of all residents?
Yes, and then in this instance,
In that instance, you got
the
City
Goose Park is here and the voters have just approved connecting it into City Hall Park
Okay.
right down here. So this
Yeah.
may be a one this is your call. This may be one that is fairly connected.
Mhm.
But we're happy to
Yeah.
come back with ideas for whatever you'd like to explore in this area.
So just to clarify what you're saying, so Lori, are you saying maybe there's the possibility instead of having a road go through to only have a park? So the houses in there would face onto a park and therefore not even need a road? Because I think part of what Paul was saying is you need to have a road to be able to have the
Yeah.
buildings face onto it. So were you suggesting like an alternative to that?
No, when Paul talked about to develop that, it either needs to be facing a road or a park. If there's a road there, then there doesn't have to be a park. I sort of like the idea of
So
having
that's
a park there.
that's correct. It may be tricky in a place that's this interior. The way it's written is really intended to be, you know, let's say somebody decided to put a park right here at the corner.
Yep.
Then homes could face onto it as sort of a green. I'd have to think about whether if it's further back here, it would need to be accessed in some way. So the park can't be floating in the middle of, it would need
It needs a
parks need to
road.
be on roads.
Yes.
So,
So my point was encouraging the park or that community gathering space rather than the road concern.
We have examples right here in South Burlington of places where the park is in the center of the housing and the parking and the garages are around the outside with the apartments.
Yep.
That happens everywhere. I mean, some very famous communities were actually done that way. And even Jane Jacobs, you know, applauded that idea to have, you know, a center that is free of roads, you know, that is a child safe area, and it doesn't have to be very big. I don't know what the name of those apartments on Dorset Street are, but apparently it's pretty affordable housing right now. Anybody know what that's called? It's Dorset Commons. It's right across from the school. Yeah, right across from the high school. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, that scaled up could be the same type of concept.
Duncan?
I think you and I were the only ones on the commission when we had this conversation. I don't necessarily remember it exactly, but I guess first of all, Donna, I don't agree with what you said earlier about we all said we didn't like big buildings. I didn't say.
Well, not everybody said it, but that was the tenor
No,
of the
I-
conversation.
I didn't say I didn't like big buildings. I didn't like the way some of them looked. I think the overall plan that staff is presenting with the T3+ border along the road and then the T4 inside, I'm okay with that, thinking back about this is an area where we're looking for housing.
Mhm.
Okay,
Right.
we're looking for housing. And I think that for us to sort of chip away and say, no, we don't want that much, we don't want that much. That's not what the overall goal should be for this area. This
Right.
is city center.
And that's not what I'm saying either. I'm not saying reduce the number of units. I'm saying use a different model that doesn't have center elevators and center halls. Because that kind of housing, we've kind of done a lot of it already. And there's a demand for other kinds of housing that are more, you know, entered each unit off the street.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm okay with moving that to T4. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
Given the fact that we have reserved a buffer of T3 along the road, which I think is important because it gives continuity to what's across both streets. But you know, would I like to see some buildings look differently from what we've seen in the other T4 areas? Yes. But I'm okay with giving you know, the ability to put more in there.
Yeah,
Do
I,
we-
I,
yeah.
I actually, but I just really want to be clear of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we don't want a lot of units and we can have 4 stories and that's fine. But it seems to me, as soon as you go to T4, does that mean that you're gonna have, you know, 1 elevator bank and long corridors for the upper floors? Because I think that's the kind of housing that is detrimental to the, you know, kind of, it's detrimental to have too much of that kind of housing, because there's a demand for other kinds of housing that we're not meeting, and that's, you know, the urban 3 or 4 story townhouse. We don't have that here, and yet it's actually less expensive to build that because you don't need elevators. Where it's 3 stories, you don't need an elevator. And everybody keeps pushing these, you know, these elevator buildings, which makes them into large buildings because every elevator is like $500,000, you know, to build an elevator. So why don't we just create housing types that you don't need elevators?
Do you, I guess I don't have a great sense as to what the difference in density might be, and I don't know if that's something that maybe staff could try to help with, maybe? I don't,
I think that maybe the crux of the question is the differences in form between T3 and T4 if we're talking about larger buildings.
So right now, and I know that, you know, you're in this place where you're also looking to make some adjustments to the T4. So, you know, keep, we're holding that in mind. Right now, there is no scale limitation on buildings in the T4. They have to have architectural breaks 3 every 80 feet, but there's not a scale or size limitation other than height. In the T3, as I mentioned, there is a maximum lot width of 120 feet and a required setback of, I think, 10 feet on either side. So you get a maximum of 100-foot wide buildings. That's the major scale difference. We've seen it play out in a couple of different ways. You know, so the Habitat for Humanity building, which took advantage of a small lot allowance, has 2 units in the front, 2 units in the back. So for a total of 4. These ones are townhomes. We've seen not formal applications, but conversations about ones that would look a little bit like these ones at the east end of Market Street, but might have upper story additional units. So the scale is about what it is, but they wind up being sort of, instead of 2-3 bedrooms, they might become 1-2 bedrooms and then units above, or a mix. Yeah, and we're happy to do a little bit more of a side by side if you'd like to have some more information given to you at you know, culled from the 300 and some odd pages of the land development regulations. Let us know what you'd like.
Go
go
ahead,
go ahead.
Duncan has,
well,
I mean,
Fran,
Fran, yeah.
Just to clarify, I guess, the difference between T3 and T3 plus.
So T3 allows for 2.5 stories, which means 2 full stories, and then the 3rd story can be embedded within the roof as one word. What's the word I'm looking for? A roofline story. Dormer. There's the word we're looking for. T3 plus is 3.5 stories. So 3 stories and then a 4th story in the roof as a dormer. That's the only difference between the 2.
So if you were to put currently what's south where the arrow is T3.
Yeah. So 2.5
across-
stories, which is
and
what
a-
you see there today.
Yep. And then across your currently, is it T3 plus or? is
That's
it-
correct. It's currently T3 plus. We've not seen anything built that takes full advantage of T3 plus.
Okay.
So I don't have an example right here of that. But it is allowed.
And then what were you saying about, so if the boundary line moved by 50 feet, you could have a T3 plus that backed up onto a 5-story building?
Right. So there are some examples in other cities. I can think of an example in Montreal on Sherbrooke Street where the first part of a building is a townhome and then it is physically connected to something larger behind it. So you wind up with a mix of types within a building, which is a possibility.
And the parking would be in the
Um,
building behind?
Right, so in an instance like that, whereas in the townhome style here, you're typically gonna get surface parking behind it.
Mhm.
If it were a combined one and it had the scale of something larger behind it, that the economics probably, along with, as Donna pointed out, an elevator also probably makes sense to then have underground parking. So you wind up, the parking becomes shared underground for all of that. But that's not a set in stone, that's just a flexibility that could create a
Mhm.
circumstance like that.
You know, I think just thinking back to how this became T3 plus, I think the idea was that we were just trying to create like the transition from the existing neighborhoods across the street and to the south, kind of the orangish areas, orangey yellow areas. You know, which is how we kind of got the strip of T3 kind of right along that neighborhood. And we've seen that belt where the arrow is. And then kind of trying to kind of step up to get into, you know, reasonably high densities. So you have a lot of people to kind of support businesses and a thriving walking downtown, but to not have kind of bigger or taller buildings just kind of right over the existing kind of shorter neighborhoods. So, you know, I think what's drawn as the potential change still meets that original objective. And it is a way to get maybe more housing and more people in an area that's well served by services. I mean, I just think back to like all the discussions we had about natural resources and how we like don't want things in all of these different areas, you know, where we have habitat blocks and bigger wetland buffers and, you know, I don't know, I feel like throughout the last couple of years, we've eliminated all these spots where we don't want things built. But what we haven't done a great job of recently is kind of re-looking at areas where it is appropriate. And I think this is something you had brought up, Laurie, like where do we want people to be? And so I don't know. I mean, I think you're right, Donna, maybe like making sure we're not winding up with too much of the same thing is probably still important, but I also don't want to just say, oh, well, let's keep it the status quo, because this could be a nice
No.
opportunity to provide more homes. So
Yeah, I
Oh.
think, I think if we look at, like, the city of Montreal is full of quite high density, 4-story buildings. They're apartment buildings, but they're small apartment buildings, you know, and they probably have 4 units per floor. And, you know, or probably 3 or 4 floors. And it's quite high density. I'm not sure where they park. I think a lot of them just have street parking. But you know, I think you can get very high density into blocks like that. And it can be attractive. I think that right now we have a problem that, you know, we're going for really efficient buildings, you know, so the buildings that are built, some people don't like the way they look, but they're extremely efficient use of space. They're really efficient to build. You don't have indentations. And I think that's kind of what the older apartment buildings in Montreal, they give you a little bit of style, you know, materials, and they pack a lot of area into a relatively small footprint, and they don't have elevators. And by and large, they don't have elevators. They could, but that's the problem with an elevator. They're super expensive and slight, you know, I mean, an issue there is the requirement of the type of elevator that is required in South Burlington. And there's some discussion at the state level that the state is just going to say, look, individual towns cannot have additional requirements for elevators, that we need to make it consistent throughout the state. Because, you know, we have this requirement for 8-foot elevators and like people don't put those in houses. And it's very expensive to do that. And we're causing problems for housing by creating requirements like that. I mean, we shouldn't be requiring huge elevators in every building.
Laurie and then Paul.
So, I feel a little not conflicted, but contradictory maybe. I agree with you, Duncan. And I also agree with you, Donna.
How diplomatic.
And well, and
Or-
I think that staff has come up with some good ideas for how to keep that streetscape feeling appropriate scale and allowing that step up to greater density. One thing we haven't talked about is building heights. And if we're looking to do density, I still don't understand why we're limiting building heights to 5 stories. I just want to put that out again. And there could be some, I don't want to say how tall, but there could be some very high density here with a nice pocket park that has a corner store and a cafe and that houses a lot of people. And if we're really concerned about housing, I think this is one place where going up might not be inappropriate. So I just wanted to add that to the whole mix. And if you do an elevator for 4 stories, why not do one for 10 stories? And get 3 times the amount of housing. And I've seen some really nice looking tall buildings.
Yep.
So I just want to throw that into the mix just to really mix it up.
Let me unmix it for a second. The problem with city center is it's really kind of a wetland. And so I don't know, Paul, I mean, it's my sense that you really can't go more than 6 feet because you can't go down without hitting water pretty soon, right?
I don't know so I'm gonna half agree and half say I need to have somebody who knows more about it than me. There is definitely a high water table.
Yeah.
And the development that has taken place in here has some pretty substantial engineering that even to just have the garages, there is a pretty substantial, pumping that's taking place. So yes, I don't know if the pumping that's taking place makes it more difficult to then go higher or not. Whether that sort of becomes an obstacle to be 6 or 7 or 8. I certainly know that there is high water tables
Yeah.
all in this area. Not surprising because this is historically everywhere around here was built and water always finds somewhere to go. So hence being the drain of the bathtub in
Oh,
this
and they're right
area.
on Potash Brook too here, so. So I have some questions too. How, you've got buy-in from the families, the people that are,
They are interested in Alana Blanchard, our project directors, had conversations with them. They are generally interested. We have not shown them this exact scheme. We wanted to bring it to you first, but they have had conversations about, what if part of it was a T3 or a T4? There's interest, but we didn't want to go too far without rechecking with you guys.
well, they can retire as multimillionaires if they want to. The section down at the bottom that's green.
Yep.
Is that's a T3 section down there too?
It is T3 plus. Yeah.
T3 plus 2. Okay, so can you go out so we can see both of those together?
Sure. I'm apologize for the colors being a little bit similar, but
That's okay.
the T3
Okay,
is on the south side that's already been built of the townhomes.
yeah, I know that, yeah.
And on the east side, where all of what is historically been single family homes north of the St. John Vianney and south of the liquor store, that's all T3. And then on the north and west side of Market Street and Heinsberg Road, that's all T3 plus today. All the way up to essentially the Potash Brook.
So, I mean, originally, I really thought that city center would be mostly T3 and T4. So I was surprised on my return to civilization to find that T5 is there.
Well, the T5 is only the orange.
Oh, I understand, yeah. But that's one of only two sections of T3, basically, that are T3 plus that are left as part of city center then.
Correct. There's a T3 section in the bottom bottom left hand of the screen here, of a piece of land that is off Barrett Street, adjacent to City Center Park. That's the only other T3 or
Right.
T3 plus.
Right. So I guess I agree with Donna that it would be nice. I mean, if we do a map where it's not just a blue line, but that becomes blue, which is what would happen, then, you know, you've got a lot of blue and you've got that one little section of T3 plus there. I mean, to me, T4 is pretty much big city, you know, I mean, it's the kind of buildings that we're getting and, you know, it's city. I mean, and I have officially, as of right now, I would declare that I will no longer fight the battle for the 19th century. I accept the fact that we are building a modern city. Okay. No more of that 19th century nonsense.
You're not advocating for brick only?
I'm abdicating. Yes, I give up. But that T3 section, as Donna said, I mean, that can be a really nice, like brownstone neighborhood, you know? I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be a T4 modern city kind of place. It could be a pretty nice residential neighborhood.
It could be modern.
Yeah, it could be modern. I mean, it don't have to be
will be.
brownstones. It will be, it'll be built in the 21st century. No, it won't be a brownstone. It won't be Montreal either, you know, but
But the scale can be.
right.
very-
It could be the shape of a brownstone,
Yeah.
but probably not
But I
actual.
mean, you know, it
stone,
could be
like-
a nice looking, you know, really nice looking residential, as I understand T3 and T3 plus to be a really nice residential neighborhood, you know, so as could that other T3 plus area. Those could be the nice residential neighborhoods of the city center. So I don't know. I guess I'm not really ready to give up the ghost on this. And if you remember, you know, we were engulfed in the controversy about the extension of Swift Street, you know, which was another very important to development. We must put Swift Street through to Heinsberg Road. And we said, no, you know, build a bike path, you know. So, I mean, there's precedent for us, you know, taking that kind of, you know, slow down the development a bit approach to things, you know. I mean, it's, you know, we don't have to develop everything. So go ahead.
I'm still trying to understand exactly where T3 and a
Donna,
half,
can you make sure your mic's on?
where T3 and a half or T3 plus goes to T4. Because so far, the T4 buildings we've gotten have all been large, long blocks, but you said in this particular area, the building would be limited to 100 feet wide?
So T3 limits buildings to 100 feet wide.
Ah,
T3 plus also limits buildings to 100 feet wide. The only difference is it's an extra story. T4, which is all of the blue, and T5 do not have any building scale limitations like
Yeah.
that.
well, so believe it or not, I'm kind of gonna agree with Lori on this because
Wait, he agreed
I
with you
love-
though.
I like the 100-foot limitation on the size of the building. And could you go up another level? If you need an elevator, you're gonna want to go up another level or two or three, because you know, everybody will tell you that you need a lot more units to pay for that elevator. And I'd say it would be nicer to go up rather than lengthen the building to create that additional housing. So I still think the scale ends up being very residential and very comfortable, and it can even have a nice scale to it, but limiting the footprint of the building is the way to do it, not necessarily the height. Put a few trees in the neighborhood and the height kind of disappears. after a while, as long as there's enough sunlight for the tree to grow.
Is that a forested area?
It's not there are trees there. It's not listed. It was not identified as a habitat block, if that's your question.
Okay, well, it sounds like, I don't know what the answer is, but,
Are
is
you
there,
looking for guidance from us
yeah.
today, or is this just a?
I think
Hash
we would
session.
love to get some guidance as to what would you like us to do next. Now, if you're welcome to have some further dialogue amongst yourselves, if you'd like, at your next meeting. If you said, we love this or we hate this, that's perfectly fine. What I'm hearing a little bit of, and please tell me if I'm misreading this, is that there seems to be a lot of support for the idea of density. And also maybe interest in exploring whether the scale can be of individual buildings can be different than what you're seeing in the T4. Which is leading me to wonder, should we come back to you and look to say what would given the amendments that were made after 2016, what's the maxed out version of what T3 plus could deliver today? Would you want to maybe adjust it? It's already its own district, so you could call it T3 plus and say, here's what we want to adjust it to be. Or ultimately is fundamentally, do you want it to become a T4 and, you're looking at other adjustments to the T4? Do you want us to come back with, where's this sort of split and what are some options for you that achieves these?
Okay.
I didn't hear, it wasn't unanimous, so I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth.
My quick question is, you said we're looking at some amendments to T4.
Just based on your last meeting of largely architectural things,
Not scale, but.
I was not in attendance.
No, it was mostly the things that you were talking about the building breaks and building facade depths and some of that other direction, to give direction to the architectural consultant to do some additional work in the coming months. It wasn't about necessarily changing T4 to have additional stories. It was more in the approximate building bulk that is now allowed, what would make it feel better, especially from the street.
Paul, would it be possible to, without burdening you guys too much, to float the idea of coming back with a couple of different scenarios? This is one scenario, what it might look like. This is another. I really like the idea of keeping the property closest to the road at the T3 so that the scale that's on the east side and south side, whatever, is contiguous across the road. So I like that part of the plan a lot personally. And I like the inner road, but it seems to me like there might be some dynamic options to think about and maybe throw a couple of different brainstorming ideas out that we can really
Certainly,
think
we're
about.
we're happy to bring a couple of different pieces back to you. Doing work to make the city center form-based code and city center generally a viable and thriving area is as listed, high priority for both the planning commission and council. So this is bread and butter to what this year's work plan includes. So
Yeah, and Laurie, I think, what you said is really close to what I was thinking too. I mean, maybe there's even an option where the 90 feet around the outside along the road becomes regular old T3, and then it opens up the interior to be like a more advanced T3 plus, so maybe the whole T3 plus gets some
Moves
kind,
closer to T4.
maybe, but with some of the things that Don was bringing up about the feel and the size and, so maybe it does become a little more of a hybrid. Maybe there's alternatives to.
Sure. We're happy to come
Yeah.
back with some, I think Fran.
Oh,
had-
Fran?
I like the road. I feel like the two buildings that are in the T4 that exist. I
Up here?
haven't Really, yeah, I have personally not paid attention to what they look like. I'd like to see them and just see how they would fit into this space and whether they need to be modified, the description needs to be modified a little bit to keep the scale right. That's all, but I like either the T3 plus on the north side seems okay, an additional story doesn't. I think as long as it is a similar townhouse is what you need there, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else on this?
Is there one other building that's on Market Street between the new builds on Garden and that curve?
Is there today or will there be?
Is there?
So there is, let me take some of all these colors off. Oop. So you can see this building under construction. This is the wing that has the gymnasium at the bottom there. So that's exists now. This is a approved site for a smaller building right here. And then that's all that exists today. The Snyder Braveman in their Army Corps of Engineers wetland permit did anticipate that there would be some kind of a building here, and that's the edge of their property.
So the buildings that are being built outside of City Hall now are in that property.
Yeah,
right,
so
that you're
this
in,
is the T5 right here. So there's a building being built right here, and then two L-shaped buildings here and here. And then what's been approved and you're just starting to see work happening now is an L-shaped building here, an L-shaped building here, and then a third building right here. And then the big one that you're seeing under construction is right here, that is next to Healthy Living. And then there's one more space for a building right here that has not been submitted or approved.
And we will ooh and ah at the beauty of the mall. Yes,
And just-
Maybe.
just
come on, put some cornices on it.
Jessica,
Yes.
Yeah.
one thing that came up, and I think this might have been at the Bike and Ped meeting, but it's worth bringing up here. And that is that apparently the playground that was built for that adjacent building block, that the owners of the building have closed the playground. And that the kids now are going, back over to the public playgrounds into the school. And nobody knew why it had happened, but it was the kids who were traveling to the other park playground. That's one of the Bike Ped members had talked to them, and they said, why are you traveling over there? Don't you have a playground right here? And they said, no, they closed it. And not sure why. Might have been insurance, but aren't they required to maintain those playgrounds if they're built?
We'll have to look into that. I recall that there was some discussion at the time of their approval that they were some elements of what they did were required and some elements of what they did were above and beyond our minimums. So I don't think I can answer that on the fly, but we can certainly look into it.
Yeah, it just
I have
seems like
not-
if they're gonna,
I'd not heard that, so.
if it's something that's required to be there, they should be required to, to keep it up and keep it usable.
Thanks for sharing the information.
I agree. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so next is agenda item 6. It's a presentation by our city's Natural Resource and Conservation Committee on the concept of a possible additional tree protection regulation. So we are very excited to hear about the topic.
Would you mind if we invited you to, if you're comfortable in sitting at the table, because the TV is set up so that you can see that one, but nobody at home can see the podium.
Absolutely.
Okay,
was the whole plan.
great. So essentially, this is the first time we're hearing about the topic. So think we're excited to hear kind of the overview and what you've been working on and, have some general discussion.
Yeah, well,
And introduce yourselves would be
Right.
helpful too.
so I'm Jean Cholot. I'm the chair of the NRCC. And
And I'm John Bosange, a member of the NRCC.
so we've been working on originally a tree ordinance to better understand and preserve the tree that are in South Burlington and trying to respect more this natural feature that is not central in the LDRs. So we originally wanted to be a separate piece that to help, but we thought maybe that being included in the LDRs could be a better venue for this particular goal. So this is a self-contained text that will be ingested and digested into the LDRs, I believe. So this is just the first draft. This is that we put together. So we looked at different other existing text in Vermont and in other locations to see how it is managed. We worked with the internal resources in the city arborist. We work in resources at the Vermont state level to get more information about the tree and what's best initiative and what species also are to be considered. Of course, we define some terms about, for instance, we use different categories of trees based on their age, size, or species, like heritage tree or preserved tree, are things that differentiate the different type of essence of tree that we want to consider. And also the more on the regulation part, the process, application, different fees, different fine, how to put in place something like that to better regulate the trees. So this is the big idea. We started with the intent and purposes. Maybe before I continue, does that make sense? Any questions about that?
Well, I guess just to summarize, it sounds like you have some suggestions for things that would go into the LDRs for a variety of different tree species, I guess you're going to tell us about, and different levels of protection that may or may not be tied to fees and fines if they're cut down, I guess that would be.
They might be, yeah.
Okay.
That's our recommendation. That
I do have one question. I was just wondering, you said that originally you guys were looking at considering a tree ordinance.
Yep.
And that now you're looking at adding tree planting into the LDRs. I'm wondering what caused that shift of approach?
Charter change.
I think what, if I can jump in, the ordinance is one avenue to go, Laura, you're right, but when it's in the LDRs, when somebody's applying for a permit, as we'll explain here, they need to come up with a tree preservation plan as a part of the permit. So putting it in that, there are a lot of permits you get, and one of them is your preservation plan, how you're going to address the trees on the property you're going to develop. So that seemed a more logical place for it to go, as opposed to being on the outside as an ordinance, like any of the other ordinances, in how to enforce this is the biggest thing we can do here. You got to have a plan that comes before you to see as a part of the other permit process.
Lori, it was also explained to me that the NRCC asked the city attorney's office, and my understanding is that it would require a charter change to be able to have a tree ordinance. So they're not currently enabled to have, they don't have the current, city council does not currently have the authority to adopt a tree ordinance, but you could regulate trees in the.
Thank you.
And this is,
Thank
the intent is really geared towards new development
Mhm.
that will be going through the LDRs. So it's a central document that matches who is really concerned by this document. So the intent is to maintain the trees that we have in the city to the biggest possible extent. Maybe we could go over what having tree in our city brings. I mean, we've been exposed to that much more for the last 10 years. I think we all know the island effect, the shade, the pollution, the aesthetic, the topsoil erosion reduction, the wildlife habitat, the reduction of the stormwater runoff, also something very important that trees do, and the value. Usually, a well-planted area is going to have more value than just something that is pretty bare. And some touristic value that can attract people and more pleasant and attractive. So that's the value that brings, having trees in the area. Then we go over in that draft the definition of what's the calipers or size of a tree. It's very technical, so I don't think we want to go over that, but it helps understand what exactly we're talking about when you talk about canopy, when we talk about the kind of tree. So this is more important. Maybe we can go over it. We separated in different type of trees. The heritage tree, again, it would be your 100 or 200 years old oak, consider really something to keep at all cost, and should be considered as a strong asset for the city. Then there's key trees that are protected trees. So the species that we want, that are natives, that we want to conserve in the area. And those trees, that list of trees is right now gathered. So we're working with several inputs so can you remind me what the three?
Yeah, there are, we've been speaking with Ethan Tapper. I don't know if you know who Ethan is. I'm sure that Shading County Forester. Adam McCullough has also been helpful, and Joan Garton from the Department of Natural Resources. And from them, we really went to the people who know a lot more than we do about native species and what is a heritage tree, a protected tree, and a key tree, like Gene said. And they have provided us with a list way too long. We're trying to cull this down to make sense, and we'll work with Craig, who's already looked at it briefly and defined what would be good native things, trees, and but the list is extensive, and they've been helpful to us, and we'll just have to work on that to get it down to what's workable and reasonable.
And who's Craig? Craig's the arborist, the city arborist.
Craig Lambert, I'm sorry, yes. Yep. We have 3 people from the state too, to get, the expert opinion and the current research on it.
And also we want to keep it flexible because of climate change. Trees that are native or will live well can change over time. And but that's what we prioritize for now as a type of species. So as I said, this is really for new development. We don't imagine that will be retroactive or will have an existing or something that's already put in place. Will not be impacted by that. But for new development, this regulation should be put in place and be applied. Yeah. So again, in short, is to create a mindset to consider trees as a resource that should not be just eliminated then build and plant another tree. If a tree is there, try to build around it, try to imagine and design housing that would be preserving this specific tree. And of course, it's not always possible. So we want to take that in account, and in the plan, have a replacement option if tree needs to go. If we cannot build an underground parking and have to put that parking lot there, that's an idea. Then we will, we thought that we could replace a tree of certain diameter with 2 or 3 trees of a smaller diameter. So try to make things work with the inputs of the city arborist to also identify the trees that should stay and the trees that could go. If a tree is sick, if a tree is a hazard, that tree could go. But if a tree is healthy and is an important tree, then that tree should stay.
In the currently what we do with wetlands is on a development, they ask for a wetland delineation. So would there be something here, do you foresee something here that you would, as part of your application for a site plan, a requirement would be for an arborist to walk the land, identify the trees, and state which ones are the most important?
Yeah,
Yeah.
establish a plan. As part of the permitting process.
Okay.
Would be that. And financing. I think the city arborist, we think the city arborist should be involved in this task. And he's already very busy. So we thought of a fee structure for trees for application to maybe finance, to have manpower to work on that plan from the city to establish what's there, what could stay, what should go, and go there. So that's a little bit the idea behind the fine, also the fine fee, and the fee would also potentially help us plant trees somewhere else.
I think trees often do get overlooked in new development plans, and the bigger the lot, the bigger the development, the more trees typically get taken down. And I think, you've started to think about, well, what can the process be? Who actually goes out and identifies, because a fairly significant development, it turned out they submitted a tree planting plan there was no basis in reality of what they submitted. They didn't show the significant trees. They showed a bunch of trees, but they weren't where they were. They weren't honest about what size tree it was. And, I only got involved because I knew the site and, brought that to the city planning office and said, this is, and right now it does take somebody else getting involved to bring this to their attention. So I'm wondering if that's a role that the NRCC might have in reviewing plans, or is that not workable?
Well,
it just there has to be some check over it.
That's a very good point. And that's one of the things we've been wrestling with. There's a number of things that, you hate to use the word enforcement, but when you're getting a permit to do something on a hillside and you just don't allow someone to bulldoze them all down and then plant whatever they want to plant there. And my guess is a developer would need to hire maybe a landscape architect, maybe some consultants, and work with Craig the arborist to design something that does because part of the application process is to try and provide which trees are going to protect which trees we have a little bit of a matrix here that if you remove a heritage tree, you've got to replace it with 4 others that come in a certain caliber. And if it's a key tree, it's 3. If it's a protected tree, it's 2. We've tried to work this through and what those trees are. That's why we have the list here that it needs to be an approved tree, and it has to be one maybe approved by Greg or another arborist, or a landscape architect that knows the soils and things like that, that would be, and yeah, we haven't thought about our role in that, but it's something we could take on. Probably, I don't know if it's a for us to do so, but
Yeah, I guess because. I mean, it's difficult because, most large developments are gonna take down a lot of trees. And I think you have to be somewhat realistic about, how does the replacement, how can replacement happen? It may not be on the same site. It may not be in the same city. Is there an exchange program or something, or, credits program or something like that? I don't think that exists. And so, I think you've identified a real issue. I think that any kind of realistic approach, has to you have to work with the developers and say,
Yeah.
Because they're going to be taking down a lot of trees no matter what, unless it's a meadow, and they're getting a lot of pushback on meadows now too. So I'm not really sure.
we have 6 steps written on this draft that talk about the application process. And involve some of the things you talk about, the people they have to seek out and put the plan, list who those people are that they got their advice from, and what the trees they pick and why. So that the work is on their shoulders to begin with, and then the guidance of what they can do, what they can plant, how big they are, if they take them down, how many they have to replace it with, and what kind they replace it with. That's all in the document. So it'll be helpful to them, I think, and as a guidance.
Yeah.
So
We hope.
I guess, so it sounds like you are relatively advanced and have some details. I think usually we try to work on like the concept level, like what is the goal? And like we have a goal. It sounds like you maybe have categories of trees. Like what is the goal for each of those categories? Like what are examples within those categories? And like, what are you trying to do? And like, I think might be really helpful for us to try to like think through like, okay, this is where you're trying to go. Maybe even just starting with your most important trees, like what is a heritage tree and what are you trying to do with it? And, to try to get a sense of like, kind of, it sounds like you have a hierarchy of,
We do.
and then there's kind of goals within each thing. Because what we've found is that's like a really helpful way to like approach a thing, and then to try to figure out like what's the best way to like get that in the plan, because it's not always like a standalone section. Sometimes like what we found was like some stuff wound up in site plan. It sounds like maybe identifying where trees on the property go needs to be part of site plan, and then there's maybe something that goes in our environmental section. Or so I think for us to have a good sense of like what you're trying to protect and how might help us kind of step through
Yeah,
what
we have that, I mean, the three types of trees, the heritage tree, the key trees and the protected tree. We establish clearly, measuring, it's scientific. It's not, oh, this is a big tree, let's keep it. So we can clearly provide that, and the plan for each, what it is down to the fee structure, what it is when you have heritage tree, what's going to happen. But also on the planification piece too, because in the past, and we did that at the LCC, we went on site on developments that are now well in progress, and identified trees that were not identified by the developer. And we advised, there's this tree, but that was just advisory. But putting a regulation in place where there is a plan put in place with the establishment of the very beginning, and also having the city being able to review through the process that is existing today, but including the trees that are not included today. So yeah, I think we can certainly put that together. All the material is there, but just be more concise and creating blocks that you would put at the right place. Is that what you were imagining?
I guess I'm not really sure what I'm imagining. I think we have a lot of questions and because I think it's a little hard to tell exactly what your goals are and like or kind of what your outcomes are. Like if like on extreme level, like are we trying to save every single tree or have we, because I know with our habitat blocks, like we've done some work on trees that didn't used to exist. And, a lot of developments we see being built now didn't have habitat blocks in place at the time. So, I mean, we have seen a lot of trees come down in areas that could have been a habitat block because we're kind of still seeing stuff built under those old rules. But it sounds like habitat blocks is what you're saying is maybe not enough. And now you're suggesting some additional tree.
Right, it's tree centered, not geographic area centered. I think it's really, even if you have a lot open and there is a heritage tree in the middle, it's not a habitat block, it's not where that tree should stay.
Yeah.
So instead of doing a parking lot, you just roundabout it. I don't know.
Habitat blocks are great, but they did not extend out into the areas of the city that have important trees beyond that. So we're kind of moving beyond the habitat block discussion, looking at language that protects important trees when a property outside of a habitat block is developed. So we're going to try to build on that. And also we're realistic in terms of we understand what development means and what developed builders need. We're trying to draw that, we can understand that not all the trees are there, but as a note, I do remember the first house I bought when I was young. It had 7 big oak trees in it, and they planted this house was built in the 30s, and these oak trees were 200 years old. And the realtor told me every one of those trees is worth $10,000 when you go to sell that property. And I've never forgotten that. Someone built that home and kept those trees on there because they were there 150 years before the house was. So that kind of piece sticks in our mind. And how do we do that in a realistic way that doesn't tie the hands, of people who want to build housing because we appreciate the need for that. So we're trying to figure out that balance. And I think we have a way of doing that in this.
Laurie and then Paul.
I have a segue comment to bring forward, and I'm sitting here thinking about developers and people who are concerned about housing saying, oh, this is all going to make houses more expensive. And, you're just putting more regulations and more costs and we have a housing crisis. And I don't disagree with that, but I think there's an education piece that needs to be brought forward about what is the value of that tree. And it's like, you're adding a cost to my project because I have to replace this tree, but that's negating the fact that this tree actually has an intrinsic value to our environment, to all kinds of things. And I think somehow there needs to be a way to show that balance so that when people say, oh, you're costing me, it's no, you're taking down a resource that belongs, that needs to be replaced. So I just somehow framing that so that you're not just saying we're being punitively adding these costs onto you. We're actually accounting for a cost that you're extracting on the community, the land, et cetera, by cutting this down. So I just think that might be something to bring into this conversation.
Good point.
There's a cost and value. Definitely, there is a value for the resale value, really, of a property. If there is a tree, like you mentioned, that is real dollar signage, not just keep a tree.
Paul, you were.
Couple things. Right now we're we'll soon be in the midst of conforming our LDRs to the recent legislation that was passed in the most recent session of the legislature. But we will be getting to what do you want to call it? Reorganizing our LDRs So, I mean, it's a time when we're going to be doing this, so we need to continue to be conscious of what you're doing and what you're saying as we do that, because now is the time that we can write this into the LDRs. I also think it's also a time when it'll be popular, you know, when we won't get a lot of resistance to tree huggers and all that stuff, you know, that will, you know, people have seen with, you know, the development, the O'Brien development on Kennedy Drive, you know, what clear cut looks like, you know, and as I understand it, they've done it again, you know, so, and even here in City Center, I mean, everybody says, what happened to all the trees, you know? So, so I think, you know, in terms of our schedule, it's good. And in terms of popular support for it, I think it's good. So it's timely. I mean, it is just perfect time to be doing it. The other thing too is, it's my understanding that a tree really can't be replaced. You know, I mean, you can replace trees, but that's not exactly the same as preserving a tree. That, like you said, John, a tree that's 150 years old is not going to be replaced by a sapling. You know, it's going to take 150 years from now before that happens again, you know. So it's, I think that we, you know, I think we should really understand the trees and get into a consciousness of how incredibly important they are to us, you know. So I applaud your efforts, and, you know, keep after us to make sure that we do what we need to do in terms of the LDRs too.
Donna?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what Paul's saying. And I mean, every tree kind of requires a setback of sorts. You know, and the particular tree that I'm still a big proponent of this one tree. And what I didn't realize that, you know, it's a type of oak tree that's pretty common in Wheeler Park. Yeah, and you know, the
I know that
tree,
tree.
it's a beautiful tree. And but right next to it, apparently fairly close to it, there's a shagbark hickory, which is a very important species in Wheeler Park. And because, you know, we didn't have the right kind of regulation that would have recognized that from the very beginning, and then recognize how much space each of those trees requires. Because the developer came back with a plan, and sure enough, you know, they had moved things, shifted them around a little bit, but they didn't give the tree enough space. And so you're going to kill the tree if you don't, you know, if you dig within its within its canopy, you know. So, and I think that kind of, I mean, it can be a variance, but I think that the planning department has to be willing to adjust things like setbacks to accommodate trees, you know, because so the developer says, well, we need to have 16 houses here, you know, to make this work. Well, can we shift, you know, do we really need 30 feet between every house or every building? Why, you know, I think those are the kind of regulations we need to look at again. It's like, how did we establish those, and what is the meaning of that? And, you know, how do we make it possible to keep these trees and yet still meet the developer's goals? And so I applaud your doing that. And I think we're going to have to do some work on this.
And there is a contact talking about the root ball and everything. There is already in this draft precise measurement on, you know, the setbacks that you mentioned and how far and not to hurt the canopy, etc. So yeah, clearly we want not only the tree to stay there, but the tree to stay healthy there. So that's part of the plan.
Just quickly, in terms of enforcement, if we get this written into the LDRs as forcefully as I hope we do, then it becomes the job of the DRB really to enforce this as part of, as you said, the site plan and the whole system of obtaining permits and buildings. So I mean, I think you've got the right approach with the LDRs. I think we're headed, you know, I think this is the right way to go. Yeah.
I'm just gonna do one very minor technical correction. The term, I think you're looking for compliance is the term of what a DRB would make sure that an application is meeting the rules. Enforcement is an administrative task of, did they follow the rules that they were approved under?
Point.
So just to be clear, enforcement is a staff zoning administrator of, you were allowed to build a 2-story building, you built a 4-story building, that's enforcement. DRB is compliance of your maximum is 2 stories, modify your plan to show a 2-story building. So just for anybody watching at home, just want to be clear on terms.
Go ahead, Fred.
So I guess one thing I think is also important, once you have the preservation plan, there should be some like ongoing tree management plan for whatever homeowners association becomes responsible for the site. Because I think the homeowners associations 10 years down the road, they don't know what the DRB said in the original plan for the trees. So how do those trees get managed by the association, 10 years after the development's approved and completed? I don't know how that can be.
Well, I can tell you what we're
included
doing in my
bylaw.
association.
Yeah,
The street trees are the street trees, but we, it's 25 years old and there are trees that are planted that should never have been planted where they were, too tall, too close, wrong species. It's such, so we have taken upon ourselves to hire an arborist and a tree people to come and look at all the trees, and there's 32 duplexes and there 16 of us have to, cut down, trim, replace, do something like that to keep it in compliance with what was originally put there. I don't know if that's the right word, Paul, I'm sorry, but I mean, there's
right.
that becomes something that the homeowners association does. And but your questions about what about someone who has private property, and I don't, we're doing it because it's the healthiest thing for the buildings, but it's a good question.
Well, I think part of the LDR is that landscaping and maintenance is part of the plan, right? Has to be done by the developers. So maybe we could include existing trees in that maintenance plan.
Yeah, I think so.
Good idea.
I guess I'm really interested in how, I well understand the wetland delineation process and it's actually quite expensive. I guess I'm curious, like, are you thinking that every single tree on the property would be identified with a size and a species and go on a plan? Or are you kind of thinking there'd be like trees over a certain size would have to go on a plan, but then maybe just general locations of canopy, or like it feels like such a daunting task to me. I do a lot of field work and and it's a big deal to go out and like map things, because we'll often for my projects will have to identify trees over a certain diameter and get them on a plan, but it's usually only like bigger trees or ones in a certain distance from water, or there's a criteria for like which ones you're doing. So
Yeah, we drafted some of those criteria. Yeah, it can be a big task, but I think it's not every single twig is going to be identified. But yeah, the protected species should be taking in account. The heritage trees that are going to be pretty simple to identify by their size. So it is a task. I don't think it's an enormous task. We did do that for the O'Brien. We went on site before they clear cut everything and identify the trees, and we give an advice on which to keep, which not to keep, that was just advisory. And it, you know, it was not enormous. It was very doable. So
So I think one of the things we're thinking of, and you're right, it can be, as you will know more than we do, daunting. But we're looking at a plan that which trees are they thinking of cutting down? I mean, there are plenty of trees that they may not even need to be thinking about, you know, natural areas that are just going to stay the way they are because the road winds up in or something like that. So there's a lot of hopefully areas that are safe from development and won't need to be identified and charted. But where they think they want to build, those are the trees that it takes some time to figure out which ones they can build around and which ones they can't. And if they can't, the plan, they've got to identify why and what are they going to replace it with, you know, and that's where all our lists and criteria come in. But it's basically if what they're going to take down, which I hope limits, you know, not having to do all 100 acres, but maybe there, you know, there's a lot of it that is going to stay natural, you know, my guess.
yeah,
One
we looked
quick-
at the 8 inches diameter.
Eight.
Tree medium to that is worth. So identify every 8 inches or larger diameter tree.
8 or 18?
8.
8.
One quick comment, if this concept is brought into the developer's process very early when they're doing their initial site layout, where's our site development going to happen? What are the important trees and species within this site? There's an opportunity to readjust that site plan before it goes through the whole development process. And so the earlier this can get brought into the developer's process, the greater likelihood there is that they can work around specific heritage trees that really are important.
Good point.
Donna?
This is something you haven't brought up, and I don't think anybody's really thought about this very much. And that is, there's forested areas, that certainly are existing cover that is really pretty scrubby. You know, you might have an occasional really nice tree in there, but boy, some of this stuff is just so grown in, and it's just never, no tree can flourish in those areas. And some of these areas are corridors, wildlife corridors that we want to protect. And I keep wondering, it's like, well, do you just leave it like that? Because those trees don't really have a chance to grow here. You really need a forester to create a plan for how to make a good sustainable forest out of a piece of basically what people here call pucker brush. You know, that there's a lot of pucker brush it's great wildlife habitat, but those trees are never going to do very well in there. And I think that would be some, you know, there's some properties near where I live that, you know, I've heard the developers say those are just scrap trees in there. There's nothing decent in there. And they're kind of right, because none of them have really been allowed to flourish. You know, they're just, you know, growing on top of each other. And maybe, you know, you do need a forestry plan for that.
You do. One of the problems of clearing out invasive species and pucker brush and all those things and opening up the light to get the trees to help them grow
Right.
is that you can destroy maybe not a wildlife habitat, but wildlife in there that lives in that scrub. You know, there are birds that nest in there and things like that. They need that stuff that we can't walk through, that we find miserable, but there's a lot of life in there. So that's a good question. I don't have,
They're never going to thrive.
no, and maybe that's an area that's not going to have trees, you know, maybe it's going to be, you know, but if it's a natural area, you know, what a forester would be able to give us some advice on that for sure.
Yeah, that's correct. The forester, we hope he can be involved in a final determination of what tree should stay, what tree can go, or not having a forestry plan like you described. I think is a great idea, but more of a functional overview of the plan that the developer puts together.
Do you, I guess along those lines, do you think this plan, the ID would also identify areas of invasive species, even if they're not an 8-inch tree? Or how, have you thought about invasives at all? Because I think that's part of what Don is getting at. Like if you have, this stand of like buckthorn or knotweed or something else, like it's not an 8-inch tree, but it might be kind of an important other piece. And I guess that's partially why I was like, I don't like a standalone chunk might not work. Like there might be some of these things that wind up like in a different place eventually in the LDRs, but it feels like maybe an important thing to be considering.
Well, we consider the opposite side of the native tree we want to conserve by default says everything else can go.
Okay.
So I think the developer wants to have the most possible land to build on. Maybe it's a stretch, but I think that they will find a way to occupy those areas that are not where heritage or protected tree would be, to remove them. I don't know. But that's not really explicitly addressed.
It could potentially be part of the replacement options, though. Like
Oh, absolutely.
maybe, I don't know if that's something that's come up, like if you do need to replace trees because of something you're doing somewhere else, like those could be like get extra credit or something for, replacing current invasive areas with
Yeah.
something from your list. So
That's a nice idea, because looking for credits when you're have to pay money to replace, we save and we cleared out, we clear cut, we did, that's a great idea. We hadn't thought about that. It would be a welcome for a developer to try and offset what they've done, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
And that would be good for the environment to remove invasive species that really hurt the native ones. So that's a great idea.
Well, and we shouldn't forget, because everything that grows above the ground, there's an equally important life below the ground.
Mhm.
And the forest biome, I mean, that never even gets brought up.
Right.
And yet, it's part of that forest canopy. Whatever you're protecting above, you have to protect below. You can't go landscaping, within 20 feet and expect that tree to live, because it's connected to every other living thing in the ground right there. And, that's the destruction of development. I'm an architect and I acknowledge it's like there's a lot of destruction involved in building.
We have some of that language close to that in the section where we have intent and purpose of this, and we didn't use the word forest floor, I don't think, but we did talk about
Forest biome.
topsoil and things like that.
The forest biome, because it's not just topsoil,
Yeah.
it's every living rhizome in the soil around a tree that supports every other manner of life underneath that tree, because it's not just the trees, it's every other living thing that's there.
The ecosystem.
Yeah.
How many
and-
pages is your document?
8.
Wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
know where you're going with this, Larry. And I'm semi-resistant.
Well, where I was going with it is, as much as I don't want to read a lot, it might be really useful for us to have an opportunity to read what you've put together so that we can ingest it and come up with feedback, digest, ingest and then digest, whatever. So that we can have a more comprehensive conversation about it. I'm also concerned about the LDRs, which are already going on the size of a tome that we're trying to figure out how to winnow down. So
This is why, the only reason I say I'm semi-resistant is that what we've found is it's best if we come up with what we want to do and like what our parameters are, and then we get like help with like exactly how to say it and like where it should go in the plan. And because I feel like we often will get like so bogged down with like the language and lose track of the goal and like what we're trying to do. And especially with something that might wind up in multiple sections of, so I don't know what the best approach is. So
I think that Kelsey, you put it in the packet about combing over the LDRs to see what is already, some of what they may be looking to do may be handled in some of the LDRs. You know, because I think you had a good, I think it was, again, it was in the packet. The developments we're seeing now were not done under the current.
Correct, mostly.
Yeah, so we haven't seen the full effect of Article 12, not that there's a lot about tree protection in there, but so I don't know if the best thing would be, I agree with you, I would like to see everything, read it so that we can see what's in it. But I don't know, I mean, it's obviously throwing more on your plate, but if you guys could look at the LDRs and say, you know, this is stuff that's already addressed, but here's stuff that is not, I don't know.
Yes,
or
that's.
what the best process is to be.
Yeah, so that's what I would actually suggest doing, is because this won't be a standalone ordinance. I would also suggest that it's not a sort of standalone article, because we already have Article 12, we already have site plan, et cetera. And as Lori mentioned, we're trying to sort of streamline and clarify as we move forward. So we don't want to be adding things and then have to clarify it later. Being able to spending some staff time to cross-check everywhere in the current LDRs where trees and, you know, topsoil and biome and habitat blocks and wetlands and all of these things kind of come into play already, and how they interact with what is being proposed, to highlight a couple of things. One, how close are the current LDRs to what's being proposed? Like, would it require a few words here and there for certain parts, certain subtopics? What's brand new, and what would need to be added to be meeting the goals that the NRCC is coming in with? And also what is potentially in conflict. So there may be things where decisions were made at some point during IZ or before to balance things in a certain way, to balance, you know, housing development and natural resource protection in a certain way. Sort of pointing out where additional regulation may come into conflict with decisions that have been made in the last few years. I was not part of the IZ process, but I know there was some of that kind of back and forth about, we'd like to protect this, but then that would mean we can't meet these other goals that we have as a city, and sort of walking that line. So that would be my suggestion, is that staff spend some time doing that, going through what's being provided by the NRCC and comparing and contrasting with what we do already have in the LDRs. But what I will say is that I am one human who works one job, one full-time job. So timeline wise, we really cannot get it back onto the agenda until about February.
Do you, which is good, do you think it would be helpful to have a little more direction from us on kind of goals, and be able to ask questions to, like, before that timeline? Like, you know, if we had more meeting time and more discussion with the committee, that could maybe like inform some of that, because if there's maybe some ideas that we don't want to go with, or we want to change, or, you know, we just had some ideas that came up tonight, like maybe you wouldn't have to do as much cross-referencing if we've already kind of crossed stuff out or added stuff.
Yeah, I guess it could go kind of either way. Either when I cross-reference and I look through everything, we come up with, well, 40% is already in the LDR, so the planning commission doesn't have to consider that 40% in what's being proposed. Or you look at it the other way and you consider everything that's being proposed and you cut things out, and then I don't have to do as much cross-referencing. It sort of ends up in the same place. I guess I would like to have some direction from the planning commission, and you can ask the NRCC about their opinion on this, but whether what, and I've have a sense, I think, but is the goal that every tree in the city be protected to some extent? Is it that you're focusing on these large heritage trees and the sort of most important individual trees? And a little more direction about the extent that you're looking for this kind of regulation to go to. So that discussion can either happen now or at some point, or it can happen after I do the cross-referencing, because I'm thinking I'll be able to pull out, here are the things that are additional or new, and then the commission can focus on, okay, those are the new things that are going past what we've already regulated. Kind of yes or no, do we want to do those things? Is that going too far? Is that going not far enough? And focusing on the new stuff as opposed to focusing on everything.
In terms of the process and the project.
Yeah.
Thinking about the whole city, the project is really big. But we already have a lot of habitat blocks. We already have a lot of resource protection areas, et cetera, et cetera. If we were able to look at our land use map and sort of draw a circle around everything that is already in a protection zone
Mhm.
and look at where our LDRs are allowing these kinds of developments, it would limit the amount of inventory that needs to be looked at. And we might pretty easily be able to say, we want to identify heritage trees that are in the areas of the city that where they may be vulnerable. And we could really reduce the scale of the work. It's a thought.
I guess that's the sort of technical ground truthing, like of like looking at actual trees. I'm talking at this point about the work in crafting the regulations.
Right.
So I think those are sort of two different things.
One question, I apologize for having to step out. And I'm not sure, maybe this is a question for John and Jean-Sebastien, but is there a scale of what is being discussed? We're using the word development. And a lot of the conversation has been around, say, new neighborhoods, but development means everything in our regulations. So development is a shed in a backyard. Is the idea that you're thinking of, if there's one of these heritage or specimen trees on a lot that is, say, a single family home, that the same rule applies at that scale as it would apply at the scale of a 50 homes neighborhood?
Yes.
I think that might answer some of your question, Lori, because if we're talking about, regardless of context, there's a whole bunch of areas that have single family house lots, and to
Yeah.
start to map that out is probably not a
It's a big job.
valuable exercise for you all.
But it only, as I said earlier, I think it would only need to be mapped out if there was a plan to take a tree down. You know, I mean, if you know where the heritage
I'm not,
trees
I
are.
wasn't questioning, I'm just posing the
Okay.
scope of what you're
Yeah.
conceiving of, because I don't think we really talked about that. You use the word development, but not scale of.
I understood.
The scope is what, for new development, like a shed in the back, but not grandfathering what's in existence today. You know,
Right.
you cut a tree that was heritage last year.
And when you say if there's a shed, what, and I'm getting a little bit technical, but I'm just trying to understand the scale. Let's say somebody had a backyard and they just said, I'm tired of having trees in my backyard. Forget anything about new development. Is the removal of the tree in and of itself what part of what you're thinking about?
Yes,
Okay.
that's subject to, yeah.
Okay.
So like this is a good question. So we had a tree.
Hold on.
So like my house, we had a tree, got hit by lightning. We were concerned it was gonna fall in the house. So we hired somebody to come and cut down my tree, but I didn't need to have the city arborist come look at it. Would that still be allowed? And then we'll get to Andrew and So,
yeah,
go
because
ahead.
it's healthy, right?
Well, it's an unhealthy tree, but maybe we differ in opinion there. For me, it's for there when there is a development, when there is construction, when there is a change, just like a permitting process, really. When you ask for a permit to do a shed in your backyard, you do your application, and part of the application is there I don't know how it can be worded, but is there a big tree that's gonna be impacted by your shed? And if the answer is yes, then we come.
It's okay if we go
But
with
I
Andrew.
think if it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
safe
go-
right now,
Andrew's gonna
it's-
pop
it's
over there.
not a development, it's just.
No, thank you. So I mean, just to clarify, I think what the city attorney had said to us and
Andrew, we can't hear
Oh,
you very
wait, you
well.
might need to hold on, Andrew. We're gonna turn the volume up so you can
Or move to
We
your
can't
mic.
hear you.
okay,
or yell maybe.
Turn your mic on.
I think the mic's
It's-
on.
Okay, that's
There.
better. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm the council liaison to the NRCC, and correct me if I'm wrong, John and Jean, but I think that the city attorney concluded that the city does not have the power to regulate trees on private property except in connection with development.
Mm.
So you wouldn't be able to tell Paul, the person, that they can't take down their tree in their backyard without a charter change, but you can tell that person that if you're going to build an ADU or a shed, you have to do it this way under the LDRs.
Makes sense.
So that's what my understanding was. And I'm just to go back to a slightly different point. Donna, you raised this. My understanding of what was drafted is that not every tree would necessarily be protected, but all the trees which the NRCC thinks should be protected would be identified. A plan would come up to try and protect those. The ones that couldn't be would either be replaced or a developer would pay fees. And those fees can then be used by the city to, for any purpose, but it would be nice to tie it into projects which then foster natural resources.
Thank you.
That was helpful. Thanks, Andrew.
I guess my point is that when you initially said development, again, I was thinking new development, new houses, that sort of thing. I guess I have a little hesitation if you are encumbering a personal property owner, like I'll use my house as an example. I have a retaining wall. The retaining wall is probably gonna need to be replaced. I have a really large locust tree there. Say I want to take that locust tree down when I do the retaining wall. It looks like what you're telling me is I would have to go to the city and talk to them about that tree.
Well, you need to get a permit to remove the retaining wall.
Yeah.
Already. So.
And if I wanted to take down the tree, that would be part and parcel of the permit.
That's part of.
That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Take down the tree first.
Yeah. Not just, I guess
Well, just to, follow this thought through in your
chainsaw.
in your thinking of what you're thinking about, what would have to happen? Would the person Duncan have to put a replacement tree in if he needed to take the tree out to put his retaining wall? And that's essentially, is that what would happen?
Yeah, or one or several, depends on the size, type of tree. If you remove a tree that's 20 inches in diameter, you will have to put 3 or 4 to 4 inches tree.
Or pay a fee, right, depending upon that parameter.
I guess the scale of what you're proposing, I didn't, when you said development, again, Paul had a good point. That means a lot of stuff. I was thinking new development, new houses, not stuff. I wasn't thinking pre-existing single
But that could
house
be, I mean,
lots.
That's a
Yeah.
draft, and it's a draft because it's a draft.
Yeah.
So if that becomes a monster that is very difficult to put in place, that has a lot of restriction on people, then we can certainly orient differently. But that was the original thinking. Yeah.
It's a good
I'm
point.
just going back and thinking, I do the straight face test when I'm on this commission. If I had to go to one of my neighbors and said, you can't cut that tree down. What look would I get? That's just.
So
my
one of the
feeling
things when we asked ourselves that question, because we wrestle with that too, I have trees in my yard and that's where we put these 11 intent and purpose pieces in here as an introduction to remind us of why I would have to do that. And it may not end up there. You're right. We may, I don't want to put a fall on that sword, but I mean, it's important when you look at the purpose of when we're doing this,
Mhm.
all trees have value. You know, and a different value to the soil, to the air, to all the things we list here. And for us right now, that's important.
I think Andrew made a really good point. I totally agree with you, John, that all trees are important. And I think we need to really get that through to all of our citizens. But as the attorney said, trees on private property, we cannot say you can't cut that tree down.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if someone lives on a private piece of property and they want to put a shed in, and you say, well, if you're going to put that shed in, you have to protect that tree. But the law says they don't have to protect that tree. You're getting into a really tricky place. So, or they can just, as I said sarcastically before, they can take the tree down and then come and make their proposal, and they would be within their right to do that. So I think if there's a way for private property owners to be informed as to the value of those trees to them and to everybody else, and encouraged to do the right thing, that would go further than saying, if you're going to put your shed in, you can't cut your tree down. So it's a tricky.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Duncan, the straight face test, if you have your neighbors have a beautiful row of 150-year-old trees and you wake up one morning and they're all gone, you're gonna say, what happened? I mean, there is the value also. of
No,
the
no,
tree.
I'm not disagreeing on that front. No,
So-
don't get me wrong.
That's why we're here. That's why it's a draft. We're all ears, you know, we want to work and get this through as quickly as possible because other developments are going to happen and we want to have something in place before we have another clear cut going on somewhere. And we really have a sense of urgency to this, with all due respect to the work that has to be done. You know, whatever we can do to accelerate this and help you. I mean, we'd come before you again and talk. This is a draft. There's some things that we didn't put in here yet because we're still working on it, you know, and whatever we can do to help with that and with Kelsey to work through to get something to you when we come back and talk again anytime if you want for more good questions, you know.
I have to say it, let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees. Right.
That's a good one.
And the tree, what we don't want to lose sight of is clear cutting.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like we have maybe two, it sounds like we're interested in talking more about this. So I think I feel like I can say that.
Can we get a copy of that, or do you want to wait to flesh it out more before you send it to us?
For you, I mean, that would be Kelsey, you have a copy of it, right? Of the draft?
Yes, I do. I do have a copy of it. It depends what the planning commission wants to do. It will not, I mean, it would be the staff's strong recommendation that it does not end up in the LDRs in one piece. So if the planning commission thinks that it would be useful to see the document, understanding that a lot of it may be stripped out when we do the review of what's currently in the LDRs and figure out what needs to be added or what could be added, that's not in conflict with other pieces of our LDRs and other goals in our LDRs, that's totally fine with me. It would be with the understanding that I'm not saying that this is the case, but it's very possible that something that is currently an 8-page document may end up being like a 8-paragraph thing. That ends up sort of broken up into different parts of the LDRs. So I just didn't want people to spend a lot of time reading the current draft and sort of combing through language and things when it's very likely not going to be staff's recommendation that it appears in the LDRs in its current form. So that'd be up to you if it's helpful to read for wrapping your brain around the concept and the scope of what's being proposed by the NRCC, but not reading it as you would read like proposed LDR language. It's sort of it's sort of sending their message in written form, not just to comb through for actual language.
So
For me,
one
it'd be
just
really useful to be able to read it and just get those concepts and
For
be able to
concept,
hold
yeah.
the big picture. I'm
Absolutely.
I'm
Yep.
not reading it thinking I'm going to vote on this next week to
Or
To
that,
make it-
you know, you want to tweak that word to be something else, like
No.
that's down the road.
We're
kind
talking
of.
big picture. there's a lot I
10,000
still
feet.
don't know.
Well, I
Stay
think
at 10,000
If I
feet.
can just give sort of a specific example of that, I gave it a quick read, and the draft, and there's no reference in the draft appropriately because it was put together as an ordinance to the habitat blocks. So that cuts both ways, that in the one hand, you have arguably stronger protections already in your regulations that if it's a habitat block, in most cases, it's an unbuilt area. At the same time, in order to be legally protecting against takings, you also indicate in the regulations that if a property is, say, 95% habitat block, that they have a right to remove a certain proportion of the trees, because we can't do regulatory takings by zoning of saying you're not allowed to build anything. And so this draft also doesn't contemplate the flip side of that same thing. And I think that would be a part of Kelsey's analysis for you. So if you're comfortable in looking at it and saying it's not been matched up to the regulations and or what those planning or legal implications could be when they are sewed together. So I think that I want to be clear on that
I
front.
think
Does
it would
that
be
say-
helpful to at least see the document to kind of all have an idea of what we're.
So I guess the question's timing. I don't know exactly what's on the agenda for the next few meetings. I know we missed one in December.
There's one meeting in December and two in November and then one in December.
Okay, so I guess if it feels like we would talk about it very soon, maybe we would work directly from the draft that you have now, but it sounds like you're still working in mind.
There's one big hole in it and there may be many more after you get done with it, but the one we sent to Kelsey doesn't have the listing of the trees yet. And
Okay.
you'll see that there's some in there, but it's about 15 of them and they were there. We guessed and put them in before we got in touch with the state and with Ethan. So there's that piece of heritage trees, key trees and protected trees is not species is not done yet. So read it, not even when you see that, ignore it because we haven't even come close to that yet. That's one thing.
Kelsey has a suggestion on this about timing too, but.
Yeah, so we have the planning commission has two big things on your plate already that really can't be pushed out any farther. And that is one, compliance with S100. That will be at least your next meeting, if not the one after, and if not possibly the one after that. Also, the city council has specifically tasked the planning commission and themselves with updates to the form-based code. So that's sort of the next big thing that you're getting as a task directly from the city council. So additional work on this needs to go after those two things. So that's why at the beginning of when I was talking, saying this puts it into February likely. Also considering that the city council currently has the city plan, and there's likely some additional work falling back on our plates from also staff to city council on planning and zoning things. So we will be doing S100 form-based code and the city plan.
What's the problem?
Yeah, it's fine. It's totally
No,
fine. I don't.
This is exactly what we were asking you.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing is that, we don't have a lot of discussion time for the next few meetings, which turns into probably after the holidays likely for us to be able to dive back in. So if you have some things that you're still thinking through, you might get the tree list, and maybe there's some things that we've talked about tonight that spurred a thought. Maybe it makes sense to keep it in your area, and maybe if you do have time and you're working on it still, we can get kind of a most current draft when we have time to really dive in, which I think makes sense, because then it's freshest in our head, like right before we're going to talk about it, rather than getting it now and forgetting. And
Yeah, but conceptually, I think and there's a few things you said that may add to that, but okay. For the staff to be able to review and see how it can be put and what is it already, what's already there, what it opposes, etc. How long do you need to do that?
I won't be able to look at it for at least a month
Okay,
because of these other things that have a significant amount of staff time.
so could we in a month give you a solid draft that you can I don't know how to word it to, that you can
I can do
check
sort of the
and work
comparison
on,
and mhm.
right, work on, and we can have the same draft to the the group, and then after that in February we meet and we have really something ready to be reviewed in a faster way, because you will have already worked out the kinks out of it and see where it should go and how, and you would have an idea of what really, it's really an article, it's a newspaper article, it's 8 pages, it's not very esoteric, and this way the process can go faster for this particular topic. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying?
I do. And that is what that is roughly the process I would recommend, is that you continue to work on it. If you want to continue to work on it, your additional meetings, I assume the NRCC meets just the once a month. So November, December, and then circulate the draft back to me, in January.
Mhm.
And at that point, it may become possible, I can't make guarantees at this point, to dedicate some time to it, with the idea that the planning commission would also have the opportunity to look either at the draft that you circulate or my analysis of it, or both. And sort of depending on the timing of that, we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
With the idea that it would come back for the next time that the planning commission would be expected to have read any additional documents for it, because all the work that we're talking about for the other things that I'm working on, they will also have to be reading and working on.
Sure.
So I think the capacity for anybody does push this likely into February, the next time anyone can be really considering it.
One recommendation, if members of the NRCC are going to spend more time on it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but what would be most helpful would be to focus on what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve, more than, if we reworded this sentence a little bit, because realistically, to move into zoning language, a lot of the words may change, but things like the discussion of, is it your recommendation that single family homes lots are included or not included? That's more of a high level policy thing.
Right,
Yeah.
framing out your policy positions.
Thinking through some of those subject areas, what if, what about trees that are, marginally dead or dying? What, what are the circumstances of that?
Yeah.
What if it's an emergency?
Yeah.
Things
Oh, yeah.
like that
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah.
not super precise language, but outcomes that you're seeking to
Yeah.
achieve,
Yeah.
I think would be most helpful to you all and to us.
One of the good things that we have a subcommittee
Right.
that is working on this, of 3 of us. 3 other people and me, not the full NRCC, so we can meet and just I share all this information with people, and we can continue to work on this carefully, bring it back to the full committee, and then we can work slowly and have something probably with your recommendation, Kelsey, by January, but we do have the ability to do something more than once a month.
That's right.
And
Well, I think-
because it takes our time to, believe we have a capacity issue, not like yours, but we, to get everybody together once a month. Is
I think we have a
what-
perfect plan, and
course.
I think we're really excited about, these ideas. So
Yeah.
very, very good.
And
Excited to see the details. Thank you.
thank you very much for your support,
Thank you for giving us time.
Thank you.
and see you
for
on
your
Valentine's
time.
Day. Or
We
around
accomplish
Valentine's
way more when we have committees working on things too. So it's really good. So next we have some minutes, just from March 10/10.
I'd move to approve the minutes as written.
second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Right,
Aye.
that was unanimous. And other business, there's 2 things about Winooski and Essex. If anyone had questions, we could talk about those. Hearing none. Okay, so Laurie had suggested we kind of circle back on the email that Megan Emery had sent. Did everyone get it? Just to make sure. Okay, good. Okay, so we all got it, and sounded like maybe you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick background, and to the discussion. So when Megan's piece came out in the other paper, I read it and I was surprised because I thought we had had a pretty good conversation back and forth with the planning commission or with the city council, and to have the counselor say, basically, I'm really disappointed. I was kind of disappointed. It's like, where was the breakdown? So I initiated a conversation with Megan and we got together on Sunday and had a really healthy, good conversation about it. And I think that there's some language and perceptive differences, but part of the issue was that Megan didn't notice in the first presentation that you gave to the city council that the language had been dropped. In her letter, she gave a recommendation for how communication might improve if updates are given to them with red lines, or so that the what's been changed is highlighted so that it doesn't get missed. I just saw it as something didn't work quite the way I hoped it would. And is there some lesson that or something we can look at to help have things go more smoothly in the future? And particularly if it had been able to come up as all the other public comment did while we were still working on the plan before we passed it off to the city council, we might have been able to take Megan's feedback and figure out how to incorporate it effectively. So I just felt like there was something that might have worked better, and I wanted to get feedback from the commission on and from staff on thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think one thing is, I'm sorry if I didn't represent our conversation and changes as well as I should have, because, you know, I did give them updates a couple times at meetings, and a lot of that did focus on those kind of introductory goal, we, you know, originally called goals and then changed to guiding principles. And, you know, maybe I wasn't clear enough that in the 4 goals with those 4 names changed to,
Yeah.
you know, called guiding principles, and then there was some language change. But what I do think I was really clear on is that we, you know, I went through this whole big giant list of, like, you know, all the public feedback that we were getting, and was really clear that we were making changes, you know, put the language up. So, you know, I guess it's a little hard for me to know, like, what would have been better. You know, I know we could always give a 100-page red line side to side, but, you know, it just felt to me like it was us working on it. City councilors were able to observe our changes, but, you know, to give the city council at that time a side-by-side red line feels like way beyond what I would have expected.
Yeah.
But maybe it's wrong. Maybe that's, maybe
I-
that was expected. I don't.
I pretty much agree with you. And I think while I understand that maybe something could have been communicated better, the draft was there and Megan missed it. And what I didn't really appreciate, having come into this process in the middle, I don't think I appreciated that my understanding from Megan is that those 4 categories were either created or vetted by or really codified by the city council, or that was what I heard. I don't know if that's accurate. And so,
Are you talking from the 2016 comp plan?
no, I'm talking about when the 2024 plan, the process started.
It was like
It's-
November of last year, maybe. It was
was
in the
about
fall.
End of September,
It was
beginning of
September.
And
October.
the city council was involved in creating those 4
Guiding principle.
guiding principles. And so there was investment in those guiding principles, and was it our place to be changing them, or were those something that were given to us by the council that we were supposed to sort of hang on to? And so I'm new to this. I don't know. And that's why I was trying to get a clearer picture.
What I was amazed by was that she was reacting to the draft before the council actually received it. I mean,
Which
I thought that was pretty incredible.
I,
You know, she's from the counselor corner, and yet she was not speaking on behalf of the council because the council officially hadn't really had the document at that time for her to have made the timeline into the other paper. I mean, I've known Megan for years. I like her. You know, we have personal conversations, but politically, you know, I just went through hell with her on the charter committee. I mean, she was determined that there was not going to be wards and that basically there were not going to be changes structurally in the city council and in governance in South Burlington. And she was, as Andrew is to the resource council, she was the liaison to the charter committee. And she just made life unbearable until everybody did exactly what Megan wanted to do, you know? And she's tough like this. I don't know what's going to happen with her influence on the city council as far as, you know, as far as the plan that we've given the council.
and I don't know. I mean, any one counselor is one counselor and they operate as a group. So I don't know what their process is gonna be. I know they're having the working session coming to just start to talk about that. So I don't know, but I think what Laurie wanted to talk about tonight was like, do we have a communication problem with the council or not? And in the future, how could we
Improve.
improve? And I
That
think
remains
it's
to be
super
seen, I
valid,
would say. I mean,
super valid.
you know, this could
you know.
just be Megan, or we'll
could be.
see whether it's the council or not. you know.
I did not read the article. I saw it, but I didn't read it. But I have a hard time. I mean, this was one of the guiding principles. You had gone in front of the council, you had explained it to them. I think she was concerned, she was not happy about the one phrase, human.
Human focus.
Yeah.
Human
Which
focus.
I remember we did talk
That we
about. and
eliminated human
We
focus.
changed it
yeah,
to something else.
Yeah,
And that was,
built environment.
yeah, and when
Sustainable
we
built
put that out
environment.
there, it was pretty. I remember, I think we put it out to the public, didn't we? Those 4 guiding
Yeah,
principles?
it was,
It was.
Had a lot of vetting.
It was out there.
Vetted and vetted and
Yeah.
vetted.
And I don't know if Megan just missed it or didn't see it, but I have a hard time. I mean, I don't think it was a communication error on our part. I'm not saying it was communication error on her part, but it was pretty well out there and vetted. So
and
I don't think that I don't think Megan agreed with what we did, but that's a different issue.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a communication issue. I think it was pretty well out there.
She and Andrew are gonna be interviewing me tomorrow.
so one of the things that, and, you know,
Yes.
so I guess for a lot of the
Yeah,
newer
there's
counselors or
vacancy.
commissioners, we weren't, I know not everyone was there, but when we had the joint meeting, the fall one, so this was before all of the winter public, sessions. We all kind of sat around, all of us and all of the city councilors, and we had a draft of the goals, and we talked through them, and we as a group made suggestions and, you know, brought up, oh, this topic might be missing, and you know, we made it really clear that we wanted something for the public to be able to react to, and some kind of structure, so that we weren't starting with nothing going into the winter planning sessions, but knowing that we were going to be getting feedback from the public, we were going to be, you know, hearing all of this. So I think we were really clear, like way back at that joint meeting, that we wanted to have something to start with, but that we were going to be making changes based on everything we heard, those hundreds of people and listening sessions. So I don't think that we did anything wrong by making a change. Like, I think that was like established from the beginning, that was the plan. We just wanted, as a group, to come up with something to start with. And
It's really helpful for me to hear more about what that initial process was, and that those quote guiding principles were an initial framework. They weren't
yeah,
codified. So, this was just helpful for me to understand. And as a commissioner, I was trying to understand, and it's helpful getting fleshing it out, because we want to be all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is the language that Megan was concerned about was in the 2016 comp plan. I don't think the intention was ever to take that language and use, take the four goals we had from that and use
And-
the exact language. I don't think that was ever the intention.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that was what I
Paul?
wanted.
I mean, I think it's actually, we've written a fairly radical document. And I think that's okay. And I think, we've had good response to it. And, they're the city council. They can do what they want to with it. Megan can have whatever influence she wants to have. But I mean, I think we put our work in, we did our due diligence and, we were united when we passed that out.
And I must say it was really nice. And I really appreciated that I was able to say that, that, individual commissioners may not have agreed with every single paragraph or every single goal or, number, but, we were able to kind of come together and put forth a document we could all stand behind. So
Yeah.
I think that that's really helpful for them too, just,
We
And
did,
it's a note of pride for me that almost, not every, but the vast majority of the votes that we had were unanimous. And I think that really speaks to the work that we put into it. So
I'm gonna go with Donna in a second, but Fran, I think you were the one who had questioned one of the numbers about, I think the 5% housing number, and that was one of the few very specifics that came up at the council meeting. And
Yeah.
and I got to kind of say almost what you just did. This is a radical document. Some of these goals are beyond what we might be able to comfortably achieve in our 8 or 2 decade long time, but we wanted to shoot for something. So,
right.
Donna?
It was just a question
your
because
microphone.
I think the term human focused sort of disappeared before I was on the planning commission and just where was that decision to eliminate that word? And did the because I
No,
No, we did it while I was.
it changed in July of this year.
okay, because I kind of skimmed through that article and I was totally confused by it. By Megan's letter. I just couldn't understand where she was coming from. I couldn't even tell if she was agreeing or disagreeing. I mean, I was so confused by what she was saying because I'm like, well, didn't those 4 principles, it was kind of expanding on the idea of human focused, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wasn't
I
that our
think-
discussion?
I think one of the things that came up in discussion
That's what I
was
thought. So that totally confused me.
the words human focused felt a little inaccessible, like it wasn't
Right.
common words. So that someone saw human focused and wasn't immediately like understanding what we
Kind of
meant.
indefinable.
I had a very different concept of it than she did in our conversation. And I agree with Megan's concept, but it didn't sit with me with the word human focused.
Yeah.
So that's just, and that's okay.
So I think, we might be here, I think, as Paul alluded to, like, we might be hearing back from the city council. They might have questions. They might have more questions about our process or how we made decisions about things. And I think we'll just have to
Yeah.
sit tight and wait until we hear back.
I think Andrew will be pretty stalwart in his support for what we've done. And so just as Megan may not feel strongly about it, I think Andrew will feel pretty strongly
Yeah.
about it. So.
And, we've seen council processes play out very differently and depending on what we've put forward to them. There's been some times when they've said, each of you individual counselors might not agree with individual things, but the planning commission was able to come together. We're just gonna, and there's been other times when they've really dived in and they've made changes and they've come back with questions. And so I don't have a sense as to what, I know they have discussion because they each said they had some things they wanted to talk about, but I don't know what it might mean for changes.
Thank you. I don't need any more. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Bat it around a little.
Yeah, no, that was good.
Those interview.
Well, that was our last item.
The hell were you doing? explain
Uh,
this.
But if we're gonna keep
Doing
talking,
video.
then we have to keep the video on. So either we're done and I'm adjourning, or we're,
I'm ready to adjourn.
okay, we're done and we're adjourning. Great meeting.
Thank you, everybody.